Good morning, all. Good morning, and thank you for spending your morning with us. My name is Luigi Del Puerto. I'm the editor of Colorado Politics and the Denver Gazette. We have a very big subject this morning. As you know, the 7-county region making up Metro Denver faces a homelessness crisis. Our region saw a 32% jump in homeless people this year alone, and the amount devoted to tackling this challenge has been growing. The city of Denver, for example, has poured significant resources into reducing homelessness, spending $150 million last year and authorizing $254 million this year. As context, when then Mayor Michael Hancock took office a dozen years ago, that spending stood at only $8 million. I do hope that you find this morning's conversation informative. One more thing, I encourage all of you to check out the work of our award-winning team at Colorado Politics and the Denver Gazette. We strive to deliver relevant, timely, and objective news every day, but we do need your support. Please visit coloradopolitics.com and denvergazette.com to subscribe. As I mentioned, we are very pleased this morning to have a special guest. Mr. Tom Wolf is a recovery advocate who intimately knows the subject of homelessness. Tom is the director of West Coast Initiatives for the Foundation for Drug Policy Solutions and founder of Pacific Alliance for Prevention and Recovery. Tom was a homeless person who in 2018 spent 6 months in the streets of San Francisco. He struggled with heroin and fentanyl addiction. He was arrested 6 times and he went to jail for 3 months, which he credits for setting him on a path to recovery. Tom today has a strong voice for focusing on the mental illness and drug addiction components of homelessness. His story has been featured on CNN, Fox News, New York Times, Los Angeles Times, and the San Francisco Chronicle. Tom, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Luigi. It's great to be here. Good morning, everyone.
And I would encourage everybody to send in your questions via the Q&A box or the chat box, and we will try to get to as many of them as we can. Tom, I guess the first question I have for you is, how did you end up in the streets, homeless and, with a pretty grim substance abuse problem?
Yeah. So, it's actually, my story is more common than people realize. So, I'm a married father of 2. In 2015, I was a homeowner. I had a job with the city and county of San Francisco, and I had surgery on my foot. They had to actually break my foot and reset it and put 2 titanium screws in my foot. After surgery, I was prescribed a 30-day supply of oxycodone for the pain, 10 milligram oxycodone tablets. And I didn't use those pills as directed. I got addicted to them. One pill wasn't every 4 hours wasn't doing enough for the pain, so I started increasing that dose until I got to about 30 milligrams every dose. And when I hit that 30 milligram threshold, I went from being, feeling no pain to being high, to having this feeling of euphoria. And there was just something special about that euphoria for me. It really manifested kind of like all my problems melted away, I guess you could say. So it manifested this kind of feeling of just everything's okay. And I wanted to keep that feeling going, so I continued to use. And as the pills started to run out, I started, later on I realized I was getting dope sick. I started going into withdrawal. And after I couldn't get any more from my doctor, I actually sought out those pills on the street. And the way I found those pills on the street is that I actually went to the internet, and I ended up on YouTube, and it had several references to a corner called Pill Hill, Golden Gate and Leavenworth in San Francisco in the Tenderloin neighborhood. I drove down there, and sure enough, I found 5 or 6 people selling pills. I started purchasing them on the street at $30 a pill. Over the next year and a half, 2 years, my addiction grew to where I was taking 560 milligrams of oxycodone every day just to function. So that's 7 80 milligram pills at $30 a pill. So I was spending $210 a day on my addiction. And basically, I bankrupted myself and my family as a result. And when it became no longer economically feasible for me to continue on those pills, plus my wife found out what was going on, I got cut off from the money, and I made the fateful decision to switch to heroin, which was only a fraction of the price. I walked down 1 block to Golden Gate and Hyde, and I started purchasing a dime of heroin, an eighth of a gram of heroin for $10 a piece. And then that's when my life really spiraled out of control. I ended up becoming an intravenous drug user, which eventually led to my homelessness. And the way I became homeless is that, one night we were asleep, I was in withdrawal at home. I stole money from my wife's purse, something that I have to own in my recovery now that I did. As many people know that are in recovery, we do things that we wouldn't normally do to support and maintain our addiction. And stealing is one of those things, unfortunately. And I went down to the Tenderloin with that money, and I ended up not coming home for 11 days. And when I did finally return home, my wife was waiting for me with a packed bag saying, I got you a bed at a treatment center. You can either go there or you can leave. And I made the choice to leave because at that moment I was in withdrawal. I was dope sick. And I ended up spending the next 6 months on the streets of the Tenderloin, where I ended up holding for the drug dealers. I became a mule for them out there as a way to maintain my addiction, and eventually started getting arrested on the street for holding those drugs. And I ended up going to jail 6 times in a 3-month period. And after the sixth arrest, I ended up spending 3 months in county jail where I got sober. I didn't find recovery in jail, but I got clean. And that was the impetus for me to accept an opportunity to go to residential treatment, a 6-month inpatient program at the Salvation Army, which was the only place that would take me because it was free. And that was 5 years ago, and I've been clean and sober ever since.
Oh, Tom, what a remarkable story. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned that you really spiraled out of control when you started taking heroin as compared to Oxycontin. What's the difference?
Well, so, here's the thing. This is what the tricky part is that there's really no difference in that you're addicted no matter what. And you're going to have to do whatever you need to do to get those drugs no matter what. Uh, but with Oxycontin, you know exactly how much dosage you're taking because they're like 80 milligram tablets or 30 milligram tablets. And with heroin or fentanyl now, you really don't know how much you're taking. And it sounds like I'm making a case for a safe supply, and I'm not at all. Because the bottom line is that you're still addicted to these drugs and you'll do anything to get those drugs. And the bottom line is that drugs aren't free. You're going to have to pay for them one way or another. So really the answer to this issue of this drug crisis and this overdose crisis is recovery. It's actually making that decision to go to treatment, and some people unfortunately have to be compelled. And I was one of those people that had to be compelled to go to treatment, and it saved my life.
Now, you mentioned that when you went to jail for 3 months, you got cleaned. That's not the place where you started your recovery, but you got clean. How important was it that you were taken off the streets against your will, put in a place behind bars, again, against your will? And so you had to go through the withdrawal process in jail.
So look, the way I try to present this to folks is that there's a subset of people on the street that require intervention. So I was already in my late 40s, not in the best of health at that point. I had been sucked up from all the drugs. I think I weighed 169 pounds when they finally pulled me off the street after the sixth arrest. Um, and it's just dangerous out there. I had been robbed. I had been assaulted when I was out on the street. Um, I've seen, I've witnessed really unspeakable things that are related all to drug use and the kind of the sad, tragic lifestyle that comes with that when you're out on the street trying to hustle to maintain your addiction. So being placed in a controlled environment where I was given medically assisted treatment that gave me buprenorphine in jail. I know they do that in Denver's jail right now, and with their MAT pod. That helped me get off of those drugs. It helped me stop the withdrawals. And I had an opportunity to think about my life, to think about how I'd lost control of everything, and to start thinking about, what pathways were there available for me to get back to my life. I hadn't seen my kids in months, and I ended up not seeing my kids for 15 months actually. Um, and I missed them, and I wanted to have something to live for, but I knew that I couldn't get back to them or to my wife or to any part of a life in general uh, from the street. So I knew that I had to do something different. So uh, jail gave me that opportunity, that respite, gave me an opportunity to think, gave me a moment of clarity. And from there, I made the decision, the fateful decision, to go to treatment.
And we have with us Vince Bisdek, the executive editor of the Gazette newspapers. He's joining us. He's in the background. And I would encourage you to, again, ask your questions via the Q&A box or the chat box. And Vince will be pulling all of those questions together, and we'll try to answer as many questions as we can toward the end of the program. Tom, I just want to talk to you really briefly about your family as you were going through this process. You mentioned you stole from your wife. Your wife truly wanted to help you, got a bag ready for you after that 11-day disappearance, if you will, wanted you to go to rehab. You chose not to. Yeah. When you were in the streets for 6 months, can you give us a sense of how your family coped?
Yeah, it was very difficult. It was very difficult for them. I also, stole from my parents. I terrorized them. My family practiced something called separation with love, where they just had to say, that's enough. My wife felt like she needed to protect our kids from me at that moment in my addiction. She was right. I had done terrible things, and that, like, I drove my kids around under the influence and things like that in my addiction. Again, things that I would never have done if I was not in my addiction. So it was very difficult for them, but they found help just as I found help as well. They found a really great counselor. My wife started going to what they call Al-Anon meetings to help her cope with my disease of addiction. But you have to understand that when someone's struggling with addiction on the street, and we think about homelessness and drug addiction, we place a ton of focus on that individual that's out there suffering right now, and we don't put a lot of focus on the community as a whole, as that person's addiction affects that community. Family, friends, your friends at work, your job, all of that gets affected. It's literally like dropping a pebble on a pond and watching the ripple effect go out. And that creates what they call harms to the community. And that's kind of what we're witnessing now in Denver and in San Francisco. We're witnessing really tremendous harms to the community by thousands of people that are in my situation or worse with this issue of addiction that are on the street.
Tom, give us when we think of San Francisco, at least, a dozen years ago, when we think of San Francisco, we think of this beautiful place, beautiful city by the shore. And, my wife and I went out there a couple of times, and we found first of all, the food is great, or was great when we were over there. And then over the years, we saw the city, the character of the city kind of changed. We saw more homeless folks. But you live in San Francisco. Give us a sense of where the city was, where it is now, and compare that to where Denver is.
Wow. So, that's a great question. So San Francisco, first of all, still is a beautiful city. It is one of the most beautiful cities in the world, really. But it has a problem. And a lot of that problem is around its politics and policy that have helped create this situation. There's no question that COVID sped up the decline of what we're seeing now in San Francisco. No other city is having as difficult a time of recovery out of COVID. That's because we may be overinvested in the tech industry, and now they all work from home, so our downtown sits empty. San Francisco has somewhere between 8,000 and 20,000 homeless people now in a city that's 49 square miles. So we're a really, really small city. So everything is on top of each other now, and it's really unavoidable. It's highly visible. What I noticed when I went to Denver last month, and I met with the outgoing mayor, Mayor Hancock, and other officials over there, was that Denver, the level of suffering on the street is the same as it is in San Francisco. The folks that I saw on the streets of Denver in their state of disrepair or disassociation from society was at the same level of San Francisco. There just weren't as many. But it still raised the alarm bells for me, because everything from what I saw visually, from what I smelled, what I heard, the people I talked to, it's moving in that same direction. And you have to take a step back and you have to think about why. And you'll hear people talk about, well, there's not enough affordable housing. There are shreds of truth in that. But you also have to talk about the fact that there's been this proliferation of drugs. There is an addiction crisis amongst the homeless community. It's irrefutable at this point to say anything other than that. That is what's happening. In California, a UCLA study was done in 2019 in Los Angeles that estimated out of the 78,000 people that are homeless in Los Angeles County, about 80% are struggling with various comorbidities, of those being addiction and mental illness. And you know, and then you see these conflicting reports that say, well, it's only 25% of the people that are struggling with addiction on the street. The answer is closer to 80% or more. Is everybody on the street struggling with addiction? No, but a large majority of them are. And we can debate all day about the causes of homelessness, whether it's a lack of affordable housing or wage inequality or addiction. For me, at this point, it's almost irrelevant to have that argument, because we are now facing a situation where in Denver you have, you know, 5,000 homeless people. In San Francisco, you have 20,000 homeless people. In LA, you have 75,000 homeless people. And if 80% of them are addicted to drugs at this very moment, that severely complicates the issue of actually ending that individual's homelessness. And you can't just end it by just putting them in a house or in a tiny home or in a shelter. They require more after that, including drug treatment in many, many cases. And I actually suggest and support the idea of having them go to treatment first, and then let's move them into housing. And the reason that I say that is that in San Francisco, 70% of all of our overdose deaths in this city happen at a fixed address. And the majority of those deaths are happening inside permanent supportive housing. So when you take someone who's addicted to fentanyl and you put them in a 300 square foot room alone, with services being accessible only voluntarily by their choice, that is actually an extremely dangerous situation to put someone struggling with addiction in, because they're all alone with their drugs. And too often they overdose and they die alone.
Tom, you mentioned that that Denver obviously doesn't have as many homeless people as San Francisco, but that you mentioned between 8,000 and 20,000 homeless people. And in Metro Denver, we have about 5,000 homeless people. And by the way, if you just look at the spending by the city of Denver alone, which is about 254 million, and you kind of break it down, that comes out to about $53,000 per homeless person per year, something like that. And just for context, the per pupil spending in Colorado is about $10,000. So we're spending like a really significant amount of money on tackling this crisis. But you said that the quantity, of course, is not the same, but the intensity of the suffering is the same. What do you mean by that exactly?
So it's just, let's put it this way. I was walking through the city of San Francisco with a director who directs international documentaries, and he's been all over the world. And he told me as we walked through, he said, the only place in the world that I've seen the level of suffering this deep was in the slums of Cape Town, South Africa. And the way he described it, and the way that I see it too, is that people who not just have just kind of given up, right? So they've let their body go. They're dirty. They're diseased. When we talk about intervention of people on the street, a friend of mine whose name is Sam, who's now dead, was schizophrenic and addicted to drugs and living on the street. Well, he had necrosis on his legs. So his legs were always bandaged up and they were rotting. You would get 10 feet away from him and you could smell the rotting flesh. I want to be honest with folks. This is actually happening on our streets right now. But because of our current policies of this radical interpretation of harm reduction and our whole body autonomy idea, where we can't intervene with that person, even if he dies, is absolutely cruel and unusual for that individual. He had to sit there and suffer on the street with his body literally rotting away in front of us, and we just walk by and ignore him That's the kind of suffering that I'm talking about. These are the types of things that I was also seeing on the streets of Denver. You have to understand, Denver has winters, right? It gets extremely cold, freezing temperatures. You have people on the street that have lost their extremities, some of their extremities because of frostbite, things like that, that don't get addressed. And what really was shocking to me when I was in Denver is that I talked to a lot of service providers, and I was told that Denver actually already has shelter capacity for all of its homeless, but they have made a conscious decision because of policy not to require people that are unhoused on the street to access that shelter service, and they are allowed to live on the street. And that's an extremely dangerous proposition, especially in a place like Denver, which has cold winters. A lot of people do go inside. Some people leave and come back. I understand that, but there's always a subset of people that remain on the street during that time, that refuse to go into shelter or housing. And that is supported by our current policies of body autonomy and civil liberties, where we just let people do what they want. And I'm all for civil liberties, but you have to understand, when you become homeless and you're addicted to drugs and you're living in a tent and you're stealing to support your addiction, you have lost your agency. You've lost your agency. Sam had lost his agency by that point and would have benefited from intervention. But because of our policies, that man unfortunately is dead today.
When you say intervention, an intervention specifically for these cases when somebody who is addicted to drugs, severe substance abuse, and who refuses to get help, to get any kind of services, and you're saying at that point there needs to be intervention. What do you mean by intervention? What kinds of intervention exactly do you have in mind?
So intervention can be a variety of different things. When you say the word intervention, everybody automatically assumes law enforcement. Well, yeah, for a subset of people, that would be a benefit. That was a benefit for me. So law enforcement actually plays a much larger role on making contacts to unhoused people on the street than people realize. In most cities, 80 to 85% of all the contacts that are made on the street to homeless folks are made by the police. So as much as people tout about, well, we need to remove police from the equation and do outreach just with social workers and no cops, that would be that would really leave a vacuum of outreach on the street, because the other resources just aren't in place to actually help with that. So, to further answer that question, in San Diego, for example, which is a very progressive city with a progressive mayor, Todd Gloria, they just implemented a camping ban in their city. And their slogan is that if you have a place to go, you can't say no. That's their slogan. And so while it's an imperfect solution, it's better than just letting people camp in your metro downtown area, affecting your businesses, affecting your community, camping near schools, things like that. And they've created safe sleeping sites. Again, imperfect, very imperfect solution, but it's more about the rhetoric and the idea that if you have a place to go, you can't say no. That's a target-specific intervention that doesn't necessarily require law enforcement. Are there people on the street that are committing crimes to support their addiction that need law enforcement to intervene? Absolutely, and that population does not get talked about enough, but they're causing a lot of that chaos that you see out there. From the drug dealing to the shoplifting, the boosting, the car break-ins, all of those things. A lot of that, not all of it, but a lot of that is caused by people that are on the street struggling with their addiction, and they need to be held accountable. And I keep coming back to this. Accountability is a cornerstone of recovery. Okay, ask anybody that's in recovery from addiction right now. It doesn't matter what side of this issue that they're on. They'll tell you at some point they had to hold themselves accountable and own the things they did in their addiction as part of their path and their road in recovery.
Tom, I want to go to some of the questions from our audience because I think they're relevant to what we're talking about right now.
Sure.
So one attendee says or asks, are you suggesting Denver should enforce its camping ban and compel people to go into shelters? Is that your position?
That is my position. And here's the thing. I've stayed in a shelter and I've lived on the street and I've been in jail, and none of them are great. Okay. In fact, they're all pretty lousy options, but being inside is always better than being outside. I don't care what anyone says. And you'll hear all the detractors say, well, shelters aren't safe and all that stuff. Look, the number one reason that people don't stay in shelters is because they have rules. And rule number one is no drugs. That's rule number one at every shelter that you go to. And that was the reason why I only stayed in a shelter for 2 days, because after 2 days, I ran out of heroin. And so I left the shelter to go back up on the block so I could purchase more drugs. So that's really, let's be real. Let's be honest. If you, while the shelter system, we can improve on it and make it better, you have to understand, again, when you get to that point where you're in a tent and you're sticking a needle in your neck every day and you're stealing to support your addiction, you have lost your agency at that point, and we have to start looking at our laws and our policies around that and figure out ways that we can intervene in a compassionate way to help move these folks off the street and hopefully into recovery.
You mentioned, and there's been this long running debate between housing first or an alternative approach, like a work first approach to homelessness. But so housing first, the idea is, the primary methodology of tackling this crisis is to get somebody off the streets, putting that person in a house, a unit, and then offering services to that individual. But there are no, just to put it in stark terms, there are no requirements.
Right.
We give you a place where you can stay, no requirements, and we will help you. And what exactly is wrong with this approach?
So look, on paper, housing first sounds like a great idea. And if implemented to perfection, it could work. And I mean perfection. It has to be the perfect scenario, right? But it's not. It's not being implemented to perfection. We are now using housing first dollars and using the housing first policy to do things like this. We'll take an old hotel that's dilapidated and we will convert it into permanent supportive housing. So basically you're taking someone and sticking them in San Francisco. Here's an example. We have a bunch of old flop houses or hotels in the Tenderloin neighborhood that were very popular in the 1940s, and in the 1990s they got purchased and turned into permanent supportive housing before even housing first became a thing. We were already doing that in San Francisco. These are 80 square foot rooms that have no bathroom. There's one shared bathroom at the end of the hall and no kitchen. And you're sticking someone in one of these old rooms that are run down. They're bed bug infested, rodent infested, roach infested. And then you tell them you get to live here for 30% of your gross monthly income, which is usually SSI or maybe welfare or something like that. Or if they have a job, 30%. You get to live here. And all these services could be available to you if you so choose to accept them. And then you walk away and you wipe your hands and say, I'm done. We house somebody. So in your mind, think about this, folks, to all of you that are watching and listening today. An 80 square foot room with no bathroom and no kitchen, is that housing? Is that supportive housing? No, it's not. And we're spending billions of dollars on that. And I love to highlight what happened during COVID. We used shelter-in-place hotels, SIP hotels, right? We housed thousands of people on the street in SIP hotels. San Francisco housed 2,300 people in SIP hotels at a cost of $260 million, something like that. Well, you know what? 5% of that entire population died of drug overdose inside those hotels. 5%. And at the end of the day, there's been so far $26 million in claims of damages by those hotels to the city to pay for, because they left those rooms in a disarray and in a mess, right? So again, housing first on paper can work. And the thing that's frustrating about this is that the housing first policy, at least in California, has been written into law here. In 2016, we passed something called Senate Bill 1380 that rewrote California's Welfare and Institutions Code to basically state that if you want any funding for affordable housing, it has to be under the housing first model. And I believe Colorado has something similar because they've embraced the housing first model. So those block grants that used to be available to run a sober housing facility or a sober home, those are all gone. And with that, a lot of organizations, faith-based organizations are a great example of this, that used to provide sober homes to people had to close up shop because they lost their funding to do it. And they became solely dependent on private funding. And that's just, it's wrong. It's not working. And in my opinion, we need every tool available to us, from housing to sober housing to recovery options. We need it all, and we've actually restricted how the funding can go, so it's only just this one size fits all monolithic solution to a problem that's not monolithic. Homelessness is not monolithic. There are many, many different causes of homelessness. There are many, many different kinds of people that are homeless, and yet we are addressing it with a one size fits all solution. It doesn't make any sense.
What if so? You said that the problem with housing first is just well, fundamentally you believe it's the wrong approach, but also unless you're perfecting in its execution, it's not going to work. But let's say, for example, that the city of Denver buys a hotel or helps a nonprofit buys a hotel, That hotel is then renovated. The hotel has its own room, its own kitchen inside the room, its own bathroom. So it's a full housing unit. And then you offer these individualized services to help that homeless person once that person is in that unit. What about that scenario?
That scenario sounds pretty good. But again, what we imagine it to be versus what the actual implementation and reality are two very, very different things. So, a lot of housing first advocates. So look, I'm not against housing first. What I'm saying is that it can work under this specific set of circumstances, and there should be alternatives to go alongside housing first, especially for people that are trying to pursue recovery. And this is the problem with so many of these overdose deaths that happen in these hotels too, are people that were in recovery. I've lost two friends that I actually went to treatment with, that were living in SROs in San Francisco, that have since died of drug overdose because they were surrounded by an open drug scene outside. They were surrounded by people using inside the rooms next to them, and it became too much for them. And we need to create a separate space for those individuals to go alongside that, so that we can actually not only promote recovery, but have a place for people to go after drug treatment that's safe, that's sober, and that's where they can still work on and practice their recovery and not be in such a chaotic environment, such as some of these SROs in San Francisco and in Denver. Finland is the country that the Housing First advocates tout as the country that has solved homelessness through the Housing First program. Here's a few things about Finland that people need to know. First of all, Finland only had like 4,400 homeless people in the whole country. The United States has somewhere between 600,000 and 700,000. Okay, the city of Denver alone has more homeless people than the whole country of Finland. Okay, so you have to have perspective, number one. Number two, when I worked, my first job in recovery was as a case manager in permanent supportive housing in San Francisco in the Tenderloin. There were 3 case managers in a building that had 105 tenants. So I had a caseload of like 35 people. In Finland, they have 7 employees for every 21 people inside their permanent supportive housing. So they actually staff them appropriately and then have the services on demand waiting for people to access if they want. That's a closer to perfect scenario than in San Francisco or in Denver. It's like, hey, if you're living in permanent supportive housing and you want to access treatment and you go to your case manager, you know what the case manager tells you? Okay, let me call these people and set up an appointment for you. Oh, great, I got an appointment for you next Wednesday. So now they have to wait till next Wednesday to go see someone at the rehab. They go see someone at the rehab and they have to be assessed. And in that assessment, they have to see if they can qualify for Medicare or Medi-Cal to pay for said treatment. Well, that takes another few days. So, okay, come back on next Tuesday and we'll see if you got approved. Well, you got approved. Okay, cool. So now that you've been approved, we can get you into detox and we have a bed opening up next Thursday. So come back next Thursday and you'll be all set. So in that 3-week period, this person is still going home every night and or going back to the street every night and is still buying fentanyl or meth and still using every day. And each day that they do that, they are playing Russian roulette. So if we really want to be serious about this, we need to do something called treatment on demand. It needs to be rolled out nationwide throughout the state of Colorado, throughout the state of California, where if someone walks into a treatment center and says, I need help, before that day is over, they are in a detox bed. That's how it used to be in the 1990s. And then we started changing the laws and rehabs started going for the money instead of actually the need and going after those Medicare dollars instead, which require all these hoops to jump through. And now you've taken a situation where it took 1 day to get someone into treatment. There have been cases in San Francisco where it's taken someone 47 days to enter into a drug treatment program. So we have to really think beyond and get into the weeds, into the details of how difficult it is for someone to start the road to recovery in your city, in my city, and throughout the United States.
So Finland's experiment is successful because you're dealing with a much more population. And it's very well thought out, but also it seems, based on your description, very well funded. Mm-hmm. If you got 7 staffers for every 21 people, that's a costly program. And And so really you kind of, and in the second scenario you laid out, which is recovery on demand, really also means pouring in significant resources so you can set up that infrastructure. And if somebody shows up and says, I need help, you can help that person right away. That's also costly. But you're saying in either scenario, this is really what we have to do. If you want a housing first, you gotta, if you want the Finland model, then you really have to spend and make sure you got the right infrastructure. And the same with recovery on demand.
That's right. Well, so look, in California, in the last 2 years, we've spent $12 billion on homelessness. So it's not like we don't have the money, right? But we have terrible outcomes. So you have to start asking about why are those outcomes so bad? It's because of the policy implementation and how that money is being spent. So the money is there. It's just that they're not choosing to spend it in the right way, in my opinion. And it's actually made the problem worse. I mean, look, we've spent $12 billion in California. Homelessness has grown by 30%. If that were a company or an organization, there'd be a full audit going on right now to ask about what happened to that money and how it was being spent. Let's just be real. That's what would have happened. So the thing is that I think that human beings, you can't put a price on a human being's life. And I think that everybody that's out on the street deserves an opportunity to have a real chance at recovery and having a life and rebuilding their life. I was one of those people 5 years ago, and I was given that opportunity. And the thing that's ironic to me is that my opportunity cost much, much less money than what it would take to actually take someone and put them in an SRO in downtown Denver. 3 months in county jail, that's not a long time. County jail is not prison. I was given counseling in jail and medically assisted treatment. And then I went to a residential treatment program where, yes, I had to be accountable. I had to work. I had to do all those things. But you know what? It gave me the tools that I needed to start rebuilding a life, regardless of whether or not I was going to be back with my family, because I was facing that real possibility that I wouldn't be able to get back to my family. And I had to make my peace with that. But it gave me an opportunity to deal with the trauma and the underlying issues that helped lead to my addiction, and try to rebuild from there. And you know, there are pathways that are cost effective. Treatment is expensive, yes, we know it. But then again, housing's not cheap either. How much does it cost to build one unit of supportive housing in Denver? About $500,000 a unit. So what are we really doing? And so the answer instead is to build a tiny home or a safe sleeping site. That's a very, very short-term answer, and a very, very expensive short-term answer. In San Francisco, we were spending $60,000 a year per tent in our safe sleeping sites during COVID. So you have to understand that the costs incurred, that Mayor Johnston is going down that road. And I like Mayor Johnston. I think he has an opportunity to pivot because he's new. But at the same time, I'm concerned that if he goes down that same road that we followed here in California, he's going to see the same kind of results that we've seen here in California. He's going to turn around after 4 years, and homelessness will have not ended in Denver like he said it would when he ran for mayor. It will actually be worse, and he's going to be scratching his head as to why. And he's going to be told all these different things, but the bottom line is that you actually didn't do what was necessary to get those people off the street and for many of them into recovery.
So Denver is going to spend $250 million by the end of this year. And if I'm hearing you correctly, you're really saying maybe you can allocate a big portion of that amount into treatment programs, into perhaps funding sober homes, rehab centers. Maybe a big portion of that amount should go to those places. Is that what you're saying?
Sure. Yeah, that is what I'm saying. So look, treatment's always has been historically underfunded. And you know, and now with Housing First, it's even more underfunded because we place all the focus on housing as the need. So look, you know, over the next 3 years in San Francisco, they're going to add 3,000 units of permanent supportive housing. They're adding 120 drug treatment beds while they're adding 3,000 units of permanent supportive housing. So just so you understand the disparity, and I'm sure the numbers are similar in Denver as well. Those numbers need to be more on parity with each other. Okay. Yes, build the housing. I'm all for it. Go for it. but you need to build more treatment and create more opportunities. And you need to embrace a variety of different treatment modalities. And you need to build what they call a recovery system of care, where you follow someone's path from the moment they enter detox until they've completed transitional housing and possibly into permanent supportive housing. That's how you see someone through a continuum of care. And there can be lots of things in that continuum of care. And I see a lot of questions on here about supervised consumption sites. And I think we should probably talk about that
Let's
because,
go ahead and talk about that. So
yeah,
Denver, as you know, passed an ordinance a couple of years ago and said, we're gonna permit this pilot program. Of course, it needs this state change in the state's statutes, and several lawmakers did try to change that statute this year, but that proposal didn't get out of the legislature. It died. So, I think the impetus for that is, rather than, or at least that's what the folks who support it are saying, the impetus for it is that rather than have those folks overdose potentially somewhere else, and obviously all the problems that result from that, get them to a place where it's supervised, and in theory there are people who know what they're doing, and then not delivering but helping these people, for lack of a better phrase, get high in a quote unquote safe environment.
right. Okay, so here's my position for everyone watching. I'm neutral to these sites because I used to be an intravenous drug user, and I'd rather be using in a safe place than shooting dope in an alley like I used to do. But really what the answer is maybe don't shoot dope to begin with, right? So that you don't find yourself in that position. That aside, as an overall continuum of care, if we had real treatment on demand and enough detox beds and enough treatment beds, safe injection sites could potentially be part of that continuum of care. But what Denver and Colorado is talking about doing is the same thing that California was talking about doing, and we just denied it, is opening these sites in a vacuum. Opening these sites when all of those other services are not available. Okay, San Francisco tried this experiment last year. We opened something called the Tenderloin Linkage Center. And in that center, our health department just decided arbitrarily, without consulting the mayor, without consulting the public, anybody, to open up a supervised consumption site inside that facility in a courtyard that was fenced off. Less than 1% of the people that accessed that linkage center in the 11 months that were open actually went to treatment. Less than 1%. So how are we really helping people? They're like, yeah, we're keeping them alive. We reversed 330 overdoses. Well, according to my sources, it was 330 overdoses from about 35 people. So 35 people that overdosed 10 times apiece. Where were the next step in interventions for that subset of 35 chronic people that kept overdosing over and over and over again? There was none. Okay.
So, let me just go back to San Francisco really quickly, because we can often see these news headlines about San Francisco, about businesses closing down, for example, because of all the problems that you have over there. Are you seeing any movement away from the system that, to your mind, really led to where San Francisco is at now? Is there, and I guess, so I'm asking the question because I'm really trying to figure out if the folks in San Francisco, especially the folks in charge of your city, are moving away from this approach that's been in place for a number of years that, to you, has not really solved the problem.
Right. So, I've always said that San Francisco is too wedded to harm reduction, and that's not a dig on harm reduction. Harm reduction plays a role in what's going to happen here. But you can't deny what has happened here in San Francisco, and then you can't deny the linkage to its policies to deny what's happened here. You hear the term doom loop a lot now about San Francisco in the national media and international media. We've become an international story. A lot of it's true, and it's sad. A lot of it's true. Look, I was born in San Francisco. A lot of it's true. Like, yes, a bunch of our stores have closed on Market Street and in Union Square. Yes, we have 8,000 people sleeping rough on our streets. Most of them are addicted to fentanyl and meth. Yes, we have 1,000 organized drug dealers on our streets here in San Francisco. Yes, the Nancy Pelosi federal building has a a Department of Health and Human Services inside that ordered their workers to actually stay home and work from home because there was too much crime around the building. All those things are true. They're absolutely true. And so, yes, these things plus the advocacy of a few people, myself as one of them, um, have helped kind of turn the tide a little bit. We recalled our uber progressive District Attorney Chesa Bodine last year, and he was replaced with Brooke Jenkins, who is a rising star and is fantastic and has taken a really pragmatic approach to criminal justice here in San Francisco. And we have elected a couple of supervisors, one of them who's actively in recovery, to help manage our city council and move it kind of more towards the middle a little bit. And it's not that we're not left, because it's San Francisco. Of course, we're left of center here, but we had gone kind of to the radical left, employing this radical harm reduction idea that hasn't worked. And now we're working with not just our police department, but the California Highway Patrol is involved. The National Guard is involved with logistics here in San Francisco to help manage some of our street crisis. The U.S. Marshals are here. The DEA is now here, and Speaker Emerita Pelosi, who's our Congressperson, just asked for and got approved for Operation Overdrive from the Department of Justice to come to San Francisco, which is stepped up enforcement of drug trafficking and drug dealing to help reduce some of these harms to the community so our city could breathe for a minute. So we can kind of take a step back and say, okay, what actually is happening here? And how can we start revitalizing our downtown core and bring businesses back and start rebuilding that tax base that we have lost? And we're starting to feel that. Next year, we're going to be facing our first deficit in years in San Francisco because we've lost that commercial tax base from all those shops and restaurants closing down and all those office buildings sitting empty downtown. And at the same time, if we can't improve our street conditions, then people won't come back. That's the doom loop, okay? If our street conditions continue to worsen, people won't return to work and our downtown buildings sit empty and that revenue continues to be lost. That's the cycle that we're caught in right now. And I'm really worried for Denver that they don't get caught in that same cycle in other cities, but it seems to me that San Francisco is lagging the furthest behind. And really, you have to, again, stop and look at the policies that we've implemented where we've embraced harm reduction across the board, not for just drugs, but for housing and for criminal justice too. And that also means that we have to look at state laws. And I hope someone from Governor Polis's office is watching this so they can understand that state laws, when they're passed, sound good when you're writing them out in the state legislature, but implementation of those laws in cities like Denver or San Francisco have consequences. And you really need to think about building the infrastructure first before you implement all of these criminal justice reforms. And those things are all intertwined and connected, and that's why we're having much of the problems that we're seeing today. Oh, Luigi, you're muted, sir.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry about that. Let me go to some of the questions from the audience. And again, to our audience, our listeners and viewers, thank you for your questions. I truly appreciate it. So, Tom, can you point us to a city in the United States or the world that is successfully implementing policies on homelessness that work?
In the world, yes. Amsterdam is a great place to look at. They are a, kind of a drug-friendly city, right? Very liberal. But they found this balance where the police and public health work together. Where when they do outreach on the street, it's the police plus a psychiatrist or social worker. They go together. They have laws in place, like they don't allow open drug scenes of more than 4 people to gather at a time. If someone's homeless and sleeping on a park bench and they make contact with them, if they come back the next day and that person's still there, they have to go with them to a shelter. Okay? They have addressed their homeless crisis and open drug scenes simultaneously by having this balance of public health and public safety working together. And what's so frustrating about that is that in places like San Francisco, our police department and our public health department don't like each other very much. And I think that's the case in many cities throughout the United States since 2020 and probably before that. But the bottom line is that they are going to have to work together. Because while you hear that, this crisis is a public health crisis and we need to approach the drug crisis on the street with a public health approach, yeah, we do. But we also need public safety too. We all deserve an opportunity to enjoy our public safety. That's why we pay taxes, folks. Bottom line, that's why we pay taxes. is that so we can have public safety. And they're literally have been trying to undo the public safety aspect for the last 3 years by following this kind of utopian, I call it a utopian fever dream of, if we dismantle all these laws because of racial inequity and things like that, which I get, um, everyone's just going to behave themselves and we're not going to have a problem. Clearly, that has not happened. And then you hear people say, "Well, crime is down," and then you find out later that, well, it's just because crime was underreported. It's not that it's down; it's actually up, especially property crime and larceny, and that's because of our changes to the law. We've decriminalized in a way, like reduced these charges of shoplifting from felonies to misdemeanors, and then kind of just word got out that you can go to Target or Walmart and boost up to $950 of stuff and nothing's going to happen to you. So when you see all those people running out of department stores, like you saw the Nordstrom video that went viral the other day down in LA of people running out with stuff, they know that even if they get busted, not a whole lot's going to happen to them. And that's the problem that we're facing now. It's, again, reforms in the absence of infrastructure.
How many, when you're meeting with elected leaders, and I guess let me ask a more specific question to Denver. When you met with folks in Denver last month, you mentioned you met with Mayor Hancock. Obviously, he's on his way out. Do you have a sense that elected officials are listening in particular to your approach to solving homelessness?
I think that the voices are growing on my approach, which is kind of coming from the middle, on this. Like, look, we understand public health is necessary to address this, but you need to have a law enforcement aspect to help you along the way. So I think the voices are growing, and the voices are growing because of the ultimate statistic, and the ultimate statistic for me is overdose deaths. Denver had 400 last year. San Francisco had 647 last year. We're on pace for 800 this year. There were 109,000 overdose deaths in the United States last year. That's never happened. 10 years ago, there were 17,000 overdose deaths in the United States. We used to be able to look the other way because when it was just heroin out there on the street, there were 80 people a year dying from drug overdose. Now that number is 650. You can't look the other way anymore. And then you have to start looking at where people are dying. They're dying inside supportive housing, the very places where you said you were going to help them and house the homeless. They're dying inside safe sleeping sites. They're pulling bodies out of those places too. It's the drugs, folks. The drugs have complicated the issue of homelessness. Are drugs the cause of homelessness? It's one of many causes of homelessness. But again, it's an anchor to the street. Once you're addicted to drugs, just placing someone in a house, it can help them, but it's also putting them at a very high risk of overdose, especially if they're using fentanyl. So people really do need to wake up and understand that you need to have a balance. It can't just be this whole one way that the advocates are really loud about, and they're highly organized about. The housing first advocates, the drug policy people, they're really, the harm reduction people are really pushing for decriminalization. Well, what they really want is they really want to legalize drugs. They want to have a safe supply of drugs. They think that the cartel is going to take their ball and go home when that happens. That's a lie. They're not going to. Has anybody gone down to the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico and ask them if they're going to just, transition to avocados from fentanyl? Of course not, right? So you have to be realistic about our solutions and what's going to happen. You can't end homelessness in 4 years. You can manage it and reduce it, but you're not going to end it because there are deeper systemic issues where our federal government needs to step in and help with as well.
Another question, if we move folks into housing, do you believe wraparound services should be mandatory? I think this is just another way of asking a different model than housing first.
Yeah, so for some people, yes, that's the thing. Homelessness isn't a monolithic solution, right? So some people don't need that move into permanent supportive housing. They need a job, right? Or maybe they need counseling and meds for schizophrenia. So yeah, so the answer is generally yes. They have to at least be assessed, and then if there's a substance abuse issue, and your housing's being subsidized, which means it's being paid for by us, by you and me, our taxpayer dollars, I think it's reasonable to ask for certain requirements to be met. The whole point of housing first, they'll say it's to end homelessness. It's to end homelessness. It might be, but it's also to get people protections, the same protections that you and I have under the Fair Housing Act, which means that when you move into permanent supportive housing, you sign a lease. And once you sign that lease, you're just like me. You're not subject to any requirements. So that actually we have to look at that process and potentially change it, but that would spell the end of Housing First, and you would be met with fierce resistance by Housing First advocates. And I understand everybody deserves an opportunity to be housed, but not everybody has the tools to maintain that housing once they're housed. And they say, well, wraparound services will solve that. Well, then solve it. It's not being solved. 70% of our OD deaths, again, are happening inside in permanent supportive housing. That's not solving the problem.
Do you think the legalization of pot in our state has aggravated homelessness, and to what extent do you think it has?
So, what I'll say about pot is that, look, I'm a Gen X guy. I'm 53, right? So the pot that I used to smoke in the 80s had a THC level of about 3%. The edibles that you go buy now at a pot dispensary have a THC level of up to 99%. So that's all I'm going to say about that. Like, again, do the math.
What did you ever get a chance to meet with Mayor Johnston, by the way, when you were here?
I have not. I would like to meet with him. He was the mayor-elect while I was there, and I met with outgoing Mayor Hancock, which I deeply appreciate him taking the time to meet with me, and Alan Salazar, and I met with other groups, Colorado Concern. They're great. It was really great to meet with them. They're a great organization that I think kind of takes, again, a pragmatic approach to this, and also supports business leaders. I would love to meet with Mayor Johnston if he's willing to talk with me, Zoom, phone call. I'll come to Denver on my dime to talk to him if he wants about these pragmatic solutions. But, it's not just him. It's the people the advocates that are out there that support Housing First. The housing lobby, the Housing First lobby is very strong in the United States, in Colorado, in California. The state senators and the state assemblymen that push criminal justice reforms on people in absence of infrastructure. Those folks, we need to talk to them too. Again, a lot of the laws that are in place now are passed at the state level and then trickle down into our cities. Local municipalities can only do so much. A lot of it is driven by what happens in your state legislature. Talk to your state senator. Talk to your state assemblyman. Talk to the governor. Ask them to take a more pragmatic look, to take a step back. Talk to people like me. I don't have all the answers, but I can certainly give you an interesting perspective from which you can look at this crisis from, instead of hearing it all from the same one way that you're hearing it right now, that it's just a housing crisis. It's about poverty. I keep almost falling out of my chair when people say, well, people are living in extreme poverty. And then I look at tweets from President Biden that says, we have the strongest economy we've had in 50 years with 13 million new jobs and inflation dropping to 3%. And I'm like, what extreme poverty? Extreme poverty is riding down and seeing, riding down the freeway in Manila and seeing tent shacks on the islands on the freeway in Manila. That's extreme poverty, folks. When you're living in a tent in Colorado or in San Francisco and you're getting 3 hots a day because you've got food stamps and you've got general assistance or general relief, or that you can walk into Walmart or Target and boost so that you can buy your fentanyl, that's an illness. And we need to recognize that. And I'm not saying that people aren't poor, but you have to start asking maybe why they couldn't pay their rent. They say people become homeless because they couldn't pay their rent. Well, I became homeless because I lost my job because I was going to work and shooting heroin in my arm on my lunch break in the bathroom. That's how I lost my job. So you have to start asking people, oh, you became homeless because of job loss? Okay. What were the circumstances that led to your job loss? How about, oh, I couldn't show up on time. Why? Oh man, because actually I started using heroin or fentanyl. If you start asking those deeper questions, which advocates refuse to ask, then you'll start getting the truth.
We're almost out of time, Tom. There is a picture of you out there. It's a mugshot of you that the San Francisco Police PD tweeted out and basically told people, hey, if you've seen this guy, let us know, because this guy's violated court orders and what have you. And I looked at that picture again this morning, and you look disheveled. You talked about the intensity of being homeless and the amount of suffering that results from that. And I see you, or that picture, I think perfectly encapsulates the kind of suffering that you went through. You're in recovery now for a number of years. You look healthy, and your national networks have written about your work and about your story. If there are some of us here who are addicted and are trying to figure out a way out, what do you say to them?
Ask for help. Look, one of the most powerful things in my addiction was denial. Someone came up to me one time and said, "Hey man, do you have a drug problem?" This was when I was on the street, and I looked at them and I said, "What problem? I'm just out here chilling." Right? Addiction is one of the most powerful aspects. Denial is one of the most powerful aspects of addiction. You have to ask for help. If you're addicted to fentanyl, you have to ask for help now. You have to be honest with your wife, your kid, your friend, your parent, and tell them that you need help. Because if you don't, you will die especially from fentanyl. You will die. Like, people could use heroin for 30 years back in the day. You could be a heroin addict for 30 years and live. You might not live a very good existence, but you're alive. Fentanyl, it's like 2 years. Like, you put yourself on a clock. That's how strong and dangerous it is. It's a different beast. Fentanyl has changed the game for people that are using drugs. And while I agree that we need to do what we can to support them, really the only way that you're going to save someone's life permanent is for them to stop using those drugs. This stuff about managing someone's addiction in perpetuity is just lowering the bottom further and further and further down. Yes, they're still alive, but the bottom's gotten so far down that the idea of stopping or recovery becomes such a distant possibility for people that they don't even try and they give up. And I think that's where we're making the mistake. We need to inspire hope. We need to give human beings purpose. And for someone that's addicted to drugs, that purpose starts with recovery. It starts with stepping away from that addiction and trying to rebuild your life and to get healthy. Look, I've been sober for 5 years. I have a good life now. I got my family back. I'm lucky. I know I'm lucky. But none of those things would have happened if I hadn't made that decision to give recovery an honest try.
Tom, I think that's a really good way to end this program. I just want to thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing your story and experiences with us. Vince, do you have any last words, sir?
No, Tom, thanks much. And thank you for your pragmatic advice on this subject. And I just want to let everybody know who attended, we'll have this video available at denvergazette.com and also coloradopolitics.com, so you can share it with other people, which we'd love to see. We'd love to see this message get out to a lot of people. Luigi, thanks for hosting.
Thank you, sir. And with that, to our viewers and our listeners, thank you for your time. Appreciate it. Please enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you next time.
Great. Thank you.